Good evening. My mic open. Hello. Can you guys
Good
hear me?
evening.
Hi, how are you doing?
Good evening.
Okay,
How was your weekend?
short.
How was the researching?
It was a lot of up and down and calling around. A lot of people couldn't help because it was limited when I went online initially. So I
Mm-hmm.
called around to try get some direction.
Mm-hmm.
Able to get a few. I'm hoping
Hmm.
that's what you were looking for, but it was like some of the
Like
people
they
to the
say,
places I called, they didn't even know what regulations they were following. They couldn't direct me. They couldn't. It was like, could you tell me what regulation as it relates to record management do you follow? And some of them couldn't. They didn't have a clue.
and that's all part of the process of doing the research. Because like I told you, as a country, we don't have it like as a national policy. So
No, no.
basically, you will find like when they craft laws, and records is a component, somewhere tucked in there, you'll find a little something that indicates that you have to keep this record, or you'll see maybe further down as a part of something else that you're gonna be in breach if you do certain things with the information. So that's to give you a idea and a feel of what we're up against as a profession. Getting there in terms of standards and um, buy-in from senior stakeholders to really give it the priority it needs to have. So thanks for sharing that, Moss.
Okay. It was interesting, but like I said, it really opened my eyes.
Mhm. Okay. So, good evening, Blair and Brooke. I already had my little chat with Mr. Roll. First person in the class. We have to hit the reaction button for me. Oh yeah. But I sent a better copy, I hope a better scanned image. Apparently, Mr. Pratt was unable to get it because the files were too big, but I think he was able to reduce the size. So if you check your email, you'd probably see um, the the first chapter relating to records management as a business discipline, and then I would have sent chapter two, which is something for you to continue. We'll discuss it like highlights, but then you would be able to take it away on the weekend and read it, and we'd be able to do some exercises in that regard. So Miss Moss has already, well, Miss Moss, you could continue because you can basically share the particular one, or if you were able, besides all the frustration trying to get to.
Okay, let me see. Blah blah blah. Okay, there's Financial Transactions Reporting Act of 2000. Part 4 of it speaks to retention of records,
Okay.
and I pulled that one up, and it's detailed. But
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I had to actually go on the government website,
Mm-hmm.
go in all. I mean, I was scrolling like forever, just looking for any kind of clue because it's like it's embedded in there, and then I'm not even sure if I got it all because they may have some, but it's how it's in there. I wouldn't have been able to pick it out. So I had to use keywords. So this one is retention of records, obligation to keep transaction records, um, obligation to keep verification of records,
Mm-hmm.
and then uh, when records need to be kept by financial institution, destruction of records.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's basically it for this. It's about 4 pages,
Mm-hmm.
but it starts at retention of records.
Right. And that's a biggie you hit, because that impacts, like you said, the financial
Financial intelligence
service
unit.
sector, right?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
so it's a biggie for the commercial banks, and then now we have credit unions and stuff
Yes.
like that. So
Yes.
that's all a part of the plan, involved in getting to know your customer.
Yes.
And right, yeah, so that's a biggie for the financial, and it's fairly new, and it usually there may be revisions based on when it first came out. When we get blacklisted, we gotta go and clean house and do all kinds of stuff. So in terms of the major blacklisting in the early 2000s, when they had to change all the update all the regulations and stuff like that, know your customer became
Hmm. Hmm.
a part of that, the regulations for that. So thank you for that. That's a very big and important one in recent times. So anyone else would wish to share what they found with regard to any laws or regulations impacting records management? If it's not locally, did you look at anything from an international standpoint?
Okay, so I looked at I when I thought about records management, I thought about national insurance
Okay.
and how they recently, we have the national insurance cards now
Mm-hmm.
that could be used as a form of ID, and then also from that database they're able to say what benefits we're entitled to, pension, maternity, survivors, disability, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that they have a National Health Insurance Act of 2016,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is around the same time that they introduced the new national insurance cards.
Okay.
And I just, I was thinking how important records management would be for that, that's basically for them to have the information would have to be on point. So with the National Health Insurance Act, it covers a whole lot of stuff. It's like um, 45 pages,
Mm-hmm.
um, and they talk about they have like the preliminary, and then there's the National Insurance Authority, where it talks about the establishment of National Health Insurance Authority, the seal of authority, and then they also have the National Insurance Fund, National Provisions. Part three is where they talk about the National Health Insurance Plan, and that entails like the eligibility, enrollment of beneficiaries, reselection, all that stuff.
So
So,
that what you're looking at, that's in terms of the legislation that would have birthed national insurance.
mhm,
And so for that, they would speak, when you look at that, then you would get an idea primarily about um, what types of records they would be producing, and you would get an
mhm,
idea of their importance,
right.
etc.
Mhm,
So, but with that, it doesn't like the specific section that Ms. Moore shared with us,
mhm,
that's embedded in that particular regulation, actually record keeping. So it wouldn't be, you wouldn't find it in the National Insurance Act outlined like that. But basically, if you were to be involved with managing their records, you would refer to why they were established in order to ensure that when you collect your information, you're or when you set up and plan to create and manage and store national insurance information, you would look at that pretty much to build your frameworks. You see?
Okay.
But within that particular, that's like legislation to bring it about. But within it, it doesn't specifically say anything towards records management. So hence the need to then basically formulate l- follow the international standards and best practices, etc., as you try to set up a system for that type of of an institution.
Okay.
Hmm. So, Mr. Rowell, are you ready to share?
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
So I guess we all find in different aspects of the recording requirements, but I
Mm,
also find I guess it'll kind of be double up because it's only a certain set of requirements.
mm.
But I found out I researched on the Public Records Act. I don't know if that's
Very good, very good.
okay.
And guess
Okay.
what? That's
Mhm.
one of the only ones we have that speak to records. But the thing with that is, that's primarily government records.
Yes.
So go
So
ahead.
what I
Quick
see.
question.
Mhm.
Excuse, sorry, Mr. Rule. Quick question, Miss Tucker. Is that the registration of records thing? Is that the
No,
same thing?
you're talking about the Registrar General's office.
Oh, okay, okay. I just
No.
Right.
assumed. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Uh-huh.
a difference. Now, the Public Records Act would involve them in terms of it being a government agency. The Public Records Act states clearly, and I guess I'll let Roosevelt share what his findings were, and then I'd see if I need to add anything else.
Okay. Um, so I'll just basically explain what the act says. This act, it is an act to provide for the preservation of the public records of the Bahamas, to establish a public records office for the Bahamas and for matters connected therewith and incidental thereto. So what I found is basically telling us how public records are supposed to be maintained, and this is the act that governs that body. Um, what else is there? I found something.
So it talks about transferring the records and that sort of good stuff too, right? When they supposed to send them, that after they're not using them in the office, then they should prepare them and send them over to the archives for keeping.
Yes. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Okay. So that's an important
Yeah,
one.
that's yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. And that's the challenge. What we're saying now, it's a mandate for the government records. But what happens in the private institutions? You still have business needs, although you're private and you're more
Mhm.
profit driven as opposed to governments where that those records are vital to the citizens. When you talk about birth certificates and like Brooke mentioned, you have national insurance cards and all that type of thing. So it puts a strong emphasis for the management of those records because those records impact a lot of lives.
Yes.
Um, so we've heard two directly linked to records management. The one involving the Financial Transactions Reporting Act and the
Mhm.
fact that you have to know your customers. So they and those records, Moss, did you notice how long they say they have to be kept?
Okay. You said how long? Let me see,
Yeah,
because I
doesn't
print
it
out
have
something.
something there to say that there's a time frame and records relating to transactions? And so
I'll let
stuff
you
like
know.
that
Let me
is
see.
how you would start to get the information you need to create a retention plan. You see, so usually in
Okay, they have here, every financial institution shall retain the records kept by that financial institution in accordance with this section in
Mhm.
relation to a transaction for a period of no less than 5 years after the
Okay.
completion of that transaction.
Right. So if you're in one of those financial institutions and you're in the area that's responsible for management of those type records, whether
Mhm,
it's paper, electronic, whether you have videos, audios, or whatever, and it's in relation to transactions, the minimum time you could build into your retention is 5 years.
okay.
And sometimes it may say 5 years, but that 5 years is what you're mandated to by the law. But
Mhm,
when you look at your business processes, you may need it for like that extra year, maybe for an audit purpose or something. So
mhm.
when you build out your retention plan, you would probably say 6 years.
Right.
You see, but
So by
basically,
the law, you have to do the minimum, but if the
yeah,
company itself could decide based on what,
yeah, what
what
their
they want to
needs
do,
are
could
for that
extend it.
particular information.
Right. Okay.
Right. So that's how come when we were talking about assessments and knowing what records you have and what records you create, that's why that part of it is so important, because you have to, when you're talking about retaining them, you want to make sure you're retaining them not excessively long, you know, but it's just to make sure whatever business needs you have, whatever regulations, and sometimes a business process or may involve several legislation.
Mm,
So something like what you mentioned with regard to the Financial Transactions Reporting Act, okay,
mhm,
that could be impacted as well by data protection, okay,
mhm,
because most of your clients, they people, so that information, you only have access to that as long as you're processing that to do something for them. When you no longer have any need for that, then as a data processor, you need to make sure, because of privacy and confidentiality issues, you handle that according to that. So sometimes that's why this whole thing about compliance needs a full structure and a program so that you can make sure you are doing what you should be doing in accordance with the legislation that governs you.
okay.
So, can I ask Blair to share? Did you, or you pretty much looked at those ones? Did you look at anything different?
No, I don't have anything different. I think I kind of focused on the wrong part of it because I was looking more into the destruction of records.
Hmm.
Um, and I think you guys touched lightly on it where you retain the records for 5 years. But specifically, our company does it for 10.
Hmm.
Um,
You're in a financial institution, right?
right. Um, and I think you said the company could choose
Right.
opt to do it a little further. So that's, I
Yes.
mean, fall into that category.
Right.
Uh, 10 years from the closing date of the account.
Hmm.
So we keep records up to that term, and then afterward we'll destroy them. And then that process is the compliance department and the client documentation department would have to sign off on the destruction.
Hmm.
We log exactly what is destroyed.
Right.
So even in that, you have to keep a record again.
Hmm. Because at the end of the day, the if you say destroy, you should mean destroy, but you have like that place, that marker. So what we end up with sometimes is you have a destruction certificate or some destruction receipt document, and around that process would also involve other controls as well. So you wouldn't just sign it off and then say destroy it. You would have to have signatures there to say, so if you prepare the information that's going to be um, destroyed, you sign off, but then you have another supervisor who has to sign off, on
Right.
what you did. And then also they sign off to confirm it was destroyed.
Right.
So if you engage like a vendor like Sunrise or someone like that, they provide you with a destruction certificate to say they completely shredded it. In some instances, a presence has to be there from the entity or whoever is has responsibility for ensuring those documents are indeed destroyed. So yeah, so a good exercise, a good effort, just to know that records management isn't done in a vacuum. Okay, we do it because, as with most things, it's to bring about some efficiencies in operations, and also you want greater productivity by ensuring you're not overwhelmed with uncontrolled information. As you know, technology is really creating tons and tons of information that you have to manage. And if you miss and let it get out of control, it becomes a nightmare. Not just a nightmare in terms of the work you have to do, but the ramifications, the legal ramifications. And you'd find that in the US, that's one of the biggest drivers for um, actually supporting a records management program. The fact that you want to protect yourself from litigation. So sent you, I know the first copy was horrible. I think it wasn't lined up. I got another scan done. And so I just wanted to find out before we start talking about retention, because the chapter was pretty in depth. It covered um, the discipline of records management, what it is. So I'm just wanting to find out if everyone's pretty clear on that, because you must know that, you know. It's a specialized discipline, just like you would have a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or what have you. It's not as old as some disciplines because it evolved out of library science principles. So if anyone has any background on library science, you would know the Dewey Decimal System is the core of that because it has a structured categorization. So when you go in the library, you are able to reference materials through this structure that they have in there for particular types of books and information. And sometimes people tend to lump in information disciplines all together, but in and of themselves, they're very distinct. The person involved in records management, you see that person dealing in non-published information, the information of the organization, the corporate memory, whereas in the library there are published works and articles, etc. So they service clients from a different sector. Okay, public want to know general knowledge, etc., that type of thing, entertainment in terms of fiction, etc. Okay, and then you have in this discipline also you have archivists. Okay, and so it's basically a handing on from the records manager, because the archivist comes in at the disposition phase. At that phase, your expired records, you're making a determination: are these records for destruction, or do we need to permanently keep them? And reasons that you would permanently keep information: if it has cultural significance, historical value, the thing with that. Whereas in records management, it's evidential because the records are the evidence of the business transaction. So once you provide that evidence and then the record becomes inactive, the or anyone right now would tell me what would cause a record that you're finished with or information that's been done to all of a sudden be in demand again, be in use? Any idea?
Any particular record? Or
Yeah, just like if you say something is you've already used it, it's finished, it's dead. Something can somehow trigger that.
I would say the court say,
Yeah.
Um,
or no.
well, if okay, if you've used the record, and see, you brought up an interesting thing
Mhm,
because that's why that's why retention, a retention management plan and retention as a practice should go hand in hand with um, making sure you're in compliance with the law. Because if you, the best thing I can put it as is, why are you keeping information that, in terms of um, the say the need active use, you've
mhm.
already kept it, your auditor is finished with it, etc. So it's no more need for it. What where you would get in trouble with that is if something happened major, okay? Some now, like we were talking about all the cases with fraud and different people getting themselves in problems.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, yes, if that went before the courts, okay, and although you were see when you have a retention schedule, you are legally permitted to get rid of that in accordance with the time frame. Once you can show that you are routinely purging your records in this cycle. But what
Okay,
the court doesn't like is when something comes up and you have information and all of a sudden you start cleaning house, you start putting the papers in the shredder and getting rid of this and getting rid of that. That's a no-no. And so that's when they call this, that's what they talk about in legal terms and as being discovery.
okay,
Okay. Now, if you like Ms. Moss talk about those the Financial Transaction Reporting Act, and so if something goes awry in that financial institution, okay, and they never implemented retention time frames on their documents and stuff like that, and all of a sudden now because they see on the news XYZ did this and the XYZ getting charged and this one getting investigated, and in the office, people start saying, "Well, oh, I don't need. Let me try get rid of these. I don't want to be a part of that, etc." You cannot do that. You
mhm.
cannot do that. Once legal action, or even if you serve a client or you do some transaction, and there's a what I call a bitterness or disgruntledness, and there's any indication that this client may decide to sue you or there's going to be some legal action, that's a red flag right away that that particular record should be marked, as a potential litigation matter.
Mhm.
Yeah, but where people get in trouble if they're not practicing records management and so they're retaining things longer than they should be. Ideally, the best practice is you inventory, you see what records you have, how they're being used. And this is not something you can do by yourself. Like I explained, it's collaborative. So once you decide that you're going to be engaging in full records management for your company and you've set up a program, okay, there's ongoing monitoring of the various stages. So you would ensure that at a certain time, you do check to see what records you have that are up for destruction. Okay.
Okay,
And you get that information from your retention schedule. Your retention schedule should indicate your functions, and under that functions, what records are generated. And then for those, what we call series of records, so that those are records that are similar and they have the same retention time frame. Okay, so then you would know, oh, these are my invoices and they are not needed longer than 1 year. So on your retention time frame, once that process has been formalized, when you look at that and you look at invoices, you would see that the time you have to keep it. So then
Mhm.
some program should be in place then. So with that yearly you collect that series of records and you go through the destruction process with them and you document that they have been destroyed. So you will have a neat, whether it's an electronic file or for persons who still have the paper, you should have a file of your destruction actions.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah, yeah. So that's how that would play out. But once that's the biggest problem in the U.S. where companies get in trouble. I don't know if I mentioned to you all about Arthur Anderson and Enron. One was an
This one.
accounting firm, yeah, and they audited this particular company that was up on fraud charges. But I guess as the news got out, they decided to clean house and start shredding and what have you. So both of them ended up in serious breach and in trouble with the law. So
That was a bad look for them that they audited these books and didn't find anything, or did they mean to not find anything?
who's that? The
The
auditors?
auditors.
See, they whatever the records were in relation to the company they audited, because that company was now before the courts for fraud,
Mm-hmm.
they should have sent notices out to the persons. And the thing is, you have some of these firms, they're global, so they have offices all over the world. So to that effect, then notices should have gone out to all offices that this XYZ company we audited is in court. There's litigation around this client. All records are to be frozen. Nobody's
Mm-hmm.
to destroy anything, whether they up for destruction or not. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot destroy them anymore. So that's why the practice of routinely following your retention and removing it has an advantage.
Okay.
Has an advantage because if you were to come before the courts and they can see that you have a retention plan and a retention program in place, and over the course of your business life cycle, you have been routinely going through this process. If the records ain't there no more, the court can't they can't get them. You
Yeah.
see? Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, but all that boils down to the whole thing about being consistent and having the frameworks in place to to carry out these processes. Yeah. So basically, from that first chapter, in terms of the foundation, the conceptual foundation about the principles and practices, um, it went on about ownership of records. Okay, and it also got into the formats of records where you can have paper, documents, or photographic media, or you can have electronic records. And we know what's happening now is paper records are being phased out unless it's of highly important significance for the reasons I mentioned earlier. They're more prone now to capture the information, and if it needs that long-term preservation, do it digitally. So we're back to my question, asking you guys, when a record pretty much is finished being used, okay, what would cause somebody to be interested in it again? And you have pretty much, if the evidence has gone away, no more business need, it would have to be things of a historical nature, maybe the personality involved, or so that's the side of it. That's the side of the coin that the archivist is interested in. Okay, so things like that would cause something that you're not no longer interested in as a business to do. But if in private archives, you pretty much people donate that type of stuff, historical stuff, to maybe the public records, the public archives. And some of them can donate with stipulations, so it isn't like everybody could view it, you know. Some influential families have things that they would donate to an archives, you know, for historical purposes. But you know, research is also an important factor, you know, because your business would have used the information, and the research comes in because, you know, over time there are people who do research about the economy, different facets of cultural development. And so something that was used in a business process or as part of that organization's journey into who they are end up being what we call archival records, records of enduring value. So they want to preserve them. And it's not just paper. Uh, they you have famous buildings and landmarks all over the world that go into a different class of preservation, you know. But at this level, we're primarily concerned with the paper and electronic information. So formats, record formats, that's good to know. And in terms of the life cycle, we want to understand that. So when you create, after you create, what happens? Okay. When you through with the information, what happens? Okay. So there's some good points in there with regard to how the information life cycle evolves over time. Okay. So in terms of records versus non-records, that's very important. That's very important to know. Because if you're going to be managing the records, then you have to know what the records are, and that information has to be conveyed to all the users. Okay. And basically, they, you know, sum up the discipline as problem solving. So with records management, you find yourself getting involved in dilemmas for the company, and you got to find probably the best solution. Maybe if they're implementing a new technology, they would want your input. If you're having to find a better means of managing your storage, you may have to interact with vendors, find out what their price is like, inspect their facilities, see if that's somewhere you're comfortable with storing corporate information. That's very important to you. We also discussed the acceptable record keeping principles that would have originated from a records management association called ARMA International. And anyone remember those principles? Anyone want to take a shot at one or two? I gave you an acronym. I
Tip
gave you
card,
an acronym that'll make it very easy to
a tip,
remember.
tip card.
Right. A tip
Basic.
card.
Uh,
And basically that would, in the book they may not outline it like that, but when you remember that acronym, you don't forget those. So A represents for the accountability.
mhm.
Okay, the T deals with transparency. The I, remember remember me, I gave that on
Yes,
Integrity.
okay,
integrity
right.
and
Okay,
protection.
right. So
Mhm,
those, remember those, especially important in terms of formulating the program and your vision and your mission for your program. Okay. And we also looked at ISO and their numerous standards. That particular standard related to records management and in the creation of information, what it's a record, etc. but it's also linked to other standards. So that I think they also listed benefits of records management. So we can do we can keep that in mind, because we will find in terms of records management, it has a lot to do with the ability to make sure to sell the program, to get the support and buy-in you need from the top executives. Because you could have a program down pack on paper, all your ducks line up in a row. If nobody at the top giving you that support, what's going to happen? You can't get nothing done, and it could be very frustrating if you're at the assessment phase and nobody really giving you cooperation to help you understand what documents they producing and why they need to produce them and what is critical for them. Because at the end of the day, you're in collaboration with a lot of stakeholders. So when the business continuity person comes to you, they're coming to you now to say, we're structuring our business continuity plan to be able to operate in the event anything catastrophic happens. What vital records does this organization have that we need to make sure is incorporated in this plan? You have to speak to that. You have to be able to give them the dialogue, and all of that helps to build your work and your merit. So when they go out there like an IT and mess up with some systems because they didn't think about some of the proper hooks, you understand that process of creating the records, and so you can give them good feedback. You can let them develop better metadata information, so that they know it ain't all about the bells and whistles. We have to make sure some core things carry into the system to make it credible, to make it work, and not frustrate the users. So with this, there's a lot of interaction and talking that has to be done. And you have your, like I say, business cases that help you to justify. Definitely would be you're reducing operating costs. Okay. You're minimizing the risk to the organization, because, like I said, if you're not routinely carrying out the function, the life cycle function, at some point, there's a gap. Okay, because if you're not disposing of information and you have it stored somewhere, and somebody even eyeing and notice your company store a place for your records, if it's not a secure facility, what happens when you start to hear leakages or clients who may, sometimes they try to solicit information, funds from people because they have information that should have been private. So all of those things we definitely must take into account when we called upon as records management to provide input. We have to let persons that may be in another specialized field, who is not aware of some of these things that go into managing records. You need to make them aware so that when they build out their systems, they incorporate the things that would help now in this electronic environment to manage that information. So revenues would increase definitely. Definitely revenue would increase if it's a revenue based business, but something like a government agency, etc., where you have, or some other type of agencies, it's more centered around the greater efficiencies that that's produced. Okay, so based on that, because we're summarizing this we're finishing off this chapter one. So like I said, the things that I said were very important. You could have made note of those to highlight them, and just make sure we understand the definition of records management. We're able to share some of its benefits. We're able to also distinguish a record from a non-record, and at this time, if we're able to mention um, a few legislations, or we're able to relate to legislations that impact us, and hence the need for records management. Pretty much that would summarize us in terms of the overview. Okay, there should be some summary points as well in the back of the book if there's any area that's still needing clarity. Okay, the fact that it is a specialized discipline concerned with analysis and control of recorded information. Okay, and we also can make a note of the fact that the records, they are what we would call information bearing objects. By that, and that term you can check in the book as well, the handout that I gave you. Make sure I go over the summary points because that wraps up those 20 something pages quite nicely. Okay. So, but everyone did get the better version of that first chapter
Yes.
via email. He said the file was too big, so Miguel did he did shrink it.
I received it.
Okay. All right. Okay. So with that being said, the chapter two, um, that's the one that we I wanted us to focus on tonight, talking more because the actual this retention schedule is the core of your records management program. Okay, so the various components within the program are centered around training your staff, etc., developing your policies and procedures, which is a part of your governance framework, being able to monitor what's happening in your work sphere as it relates to the records management cycle. But you're not going to have anything without a retention table, because that's one of the hooks that determines what happened with the information, and you can enforce other policies along with it. So there are it's not a set in stone format. It's just that basically you're trying to capture um, information on the types of record your business generate. You want to know how long you need to keep it, and then you can go even further and basically identify the authority, or like we did, the legislation or regulation that is the reason behind having to keep it. Okay, or it may just be, if it's not from legislation, like we said, it's a business need. So you could have something in relation to audits that you would keep for a certain time frame as well. Okay, so anyone want to volunteer to start our reading process for that particular chapter? So we can, as we go through, you can ask any particular questions, and we can We can wrap this up tonight, and then you would be able to read through it again on the weekend, and we'll be able to clearly understand why this is so important. And so to prepare it, you have to do something called inventory. Okay, just like in the food store or other places, other stores, you need to know what's in stock. Okay, and when you check in what's in stock, sometimes some of the stock outdated, and that's what we were just talking about it already. The record ain't no more use to the organization, it's expired. Okay, so what do you do with out of stock? Okay, you may find in your inventory special protection for certain things, you know. So if you're in a jewelry store, your high end pieces, they ain't gonna just have the regular little attendant or close up by the window. You can have them set up in a special secure area. So the same thing with information, to be able to do the things we need to do to manage it. That's where all of this other informational data comes in, metadata, and all that is your data about the data that you are you are managing. Okay, and so data is a term that could do has to do with research. Okay, in the electronic realm, it relates to one field of information, and those different fields give you the true whole picture, so to speak. So right now, in order for us to get to that vital and important part of of knowing what you have, because there's a saying, you can't you can't manage what you don't know you have, you know. So in order to call yourself your institutional records manager, you need to know about the business functions of those departments and what types of records they're generating, in order for you to be able to establish who is the owner and ultimately responsible for making sure the record is saved where it should go. Okay, so it has a number, it has a few templates or samples in there that we can look through, but let's um let's read it out so we can share and clarify anything that may need to be clarified. So Mr. Roll, since you were here first, you want to read you want to read for us first? You want to start as we talk about the inventory?
No problem, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, second. Okay, so we're reading preparing retention
Right,
schedules one, right?
right.
Inventory and
That's the
records.
that that's the crux of the matter.
Chapter two. Okay,
Yeah,
everybody can hear me clear, right? You can hear me good?
yeah.
Okay. A records inventory is a fact finding survey that identifies and describes records maintained by all or part of an organization. The inventory's purpose is to gather information about the quantity, physical characteristics, storage conditions, business use, and perceived value of records that the organization maintains. As explained in the chapter one, records management is a problem-solving activity. Records keeping problems cannot be successfully addressed until those problems are clearly deli-
Delineated, yeah.
delineated, thank you, and fully understood. The characteristics of an organization's records cannot be determined by intuition or anecdotal evidence. Empirical methods are necessary. As the initial step in a scientific approach to systematic control of recorded information, a thorough inventory is an essential component of an effective records management program. Properly conducted,
Oh, let just you
sorry,
heard that? You heard that? The records management program, it has to involve an inventory.
a thorough inventory.
Yes, because that like I said, you need to be able to identify what you have to manage. You can go ahead.
Thank you. Properly conducted, a records inventory provides detailed information about the nature and number of records maintained by a corporation, government agency, educational institution, professional services firm, or other organizations. The inventory is a means to an end rather than an end in itself. Information collected during the inventory is used to prepare record retention schedules, which, as discussed in the next chapter, indicate the length of time that specific types of records are to be kept. As an alternative to the inventory methods discussed in this chapter, retention schedules can be based on pre-formulated lists of generic records types that are presumably associated with commonly encountered business activities, such as accounting, purchasing, human resources, engineering, or sales. That approach, which reduces the time and effort to prepare retention schedules, can be effective in some circumstances. It is best suited to straightforward business processes that are performed in more or less the same way from one organization to another, and that have well-established record-keeping requirements. A reasonable assumption, for example, is that an accounting office will have ledgers and journals. An accounts payable department will have invoices. A purchasing department will have purchase orders. A human resource department will have personnel files. An engineering department will have drawings and specifications. And a sales department will have customer order records. Retention requirements for these commonly encountered record types have been extensively analyzed. They are routinely included in retention schedules published by government agencies, for example. For purposes of preparing retention schedules, time-consuming empirical examination of such records contributes little, if any, new understanding about them. As a potential shortcoming, however, retention schedules prepared in this manner are characteristically vague and incomplete. They sometimes contain highly generalized descriptions of records types that may be difficult to match against the records that a given department actually possesses. And they necessarily omit records associated with business processes or activities that are unusual or unique to a given organization. Only an inventory based on the empirical methods discussed in this chapter can reliably identify and describe such records. Nonetheless, lists of generic records types and predetermined retention periods are a useful starting point for inventory records associated with commonly encountered business operations. When inventorying records in an accounting department, for example, having a pre-formulated list of the kinds of records that are likely to be encountered is undeniably helpful. In particular, pre-formulated lists of generic record types can help focus the inventory process on unique records or those with special retention requirements. This chapter emphasizes the roles of a records inventory in preparation of retention schedules, but inventory information may also be useful for other records management initiatives. In addition to confirming the existence of specific types of records held by an organization and describing their most important attributes, a records inventory can identify inactive records that might be discarded, transferred from office locations to offsite storage, or microfilm. A comprehensive records inventory can also identify vital records and provide potentially valuable information about the quantity, arrangement, and use of organizations' active records. Inventorying concepts and methods have been well established components of records management practice for over half a century. A comprehensive records inventory consists of the following work steps. Number one,
Something now. Just
sorry,
just make sure you mark that piece. Okay.
okay.
Mark those important work steps.
A comprehensive records inventory consists of the following work steps. Number one, develop an inventory plan. Step two, prepare a survey instrument for collecting inventory information.
And so that's the type questions that you want to get. You're looking to make sure you don't have to keep going back after you done inventory because you forgot to something is important and you forgot to ask it. So that's how come this all this prep work is important to make sure when you go out, you get a good harvest in terms of details about the organization's information and who is using it.
Right? Um, 3, conduct the inventory according to plan. 4, tabulate or otherwise write up the inventory results, collecting additional information and performing other follow-up tasks as necessary. This chapter describes and discusses these work steps. It emphasizes practical considerations for records managers who must plan and conduct inventories for record retention initiatives. Once the inventory is completed, the information collected must be analyzed. That activity, which involves the formulation of retention recommendations for specific types of records, is examined in Chapter 3.
Thank you, Russell.
No problem, ma'am.
Now, so how many of you actually can say this is occurring in your organization? You have somebody, do you have persons who are under that designation of they may not be the records manager, but they may be a records officer. You may have a records liaison, any type um or any staff related or linked to this activity in your offices? Or do you bring in consultants and just let them do it? That's the easy way out.
Yeah, but they can mess stuff up too.
Huh?
I say consultants can mess stuff up too.
You're a lie. You're a lie. So that's why when they bring them in, you got to make sure you're a part of that team. If this is your vested interest, if you have a vested interest in making sure they set up the right systems, you got to
But I'm
you.
sucker, I ain't a proponent of doing it myself. I get in problems.
Huh?
I, uh, I don't know. Because you only need to do it wrong once for me, and then
Uh, uh,
I gotta be looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds to make sure you're doing it properly. So I
you
figure
you
I just do it.
you're in the financial sector, right?
Yes, ma'am. So
Oh
see,
Lord.
if things go wrong with financials and auditors can't find stuff,
Uh-huh.
that's true. But sometimes you spend 3 days looking for one thing, when if someone had done it properly,
Mm-hmm.
it could have
And
just been pulled.
right. And see, that's why it's so important in this part of the discipline to make sure that the governance level is done.
Right,
So you have those policies and stuff that are being not just in writing, but are being applied, and you have the backing that you can sanction or you can say something to persons when they're not complying.
right.
Yeah. So basically, it's like rolling up your sleeves when you start out. Now, I don't know if anybody in here had the experience where they send them to an area or a department, and that was job number one. You had to get those records in order. So you have to roll up your sleeves. You have to come dig into old dusty box. You don't know if one big spider can run out on you or something, you know. And that's the thing. A lot of people, they it's a turn off when they think about records, but that's because for their experience, a lot of times it's been poorly managed records, and you have to be like a Blair. You have to do it yourself. So, you know, if you want it done properly, you got to do it yourself, and it shouldn't be that way because of the importance. They are vital. The business came about and its activities generate records. Remember that records information tree? I think I have to look for that and I'll send that back to you all so you can see that whole concept of how it starts out. At the root, you have these people creating and using records, and it just blossoms into all these different avenues. But to get to, before you could reap the harvest, you got to do some work, and this is one of those areas that you got to really put a lot in to get good results. And so basically, they're
I have
gonna
a
talk.
question, Ms.
Go ahead.
Tucker.
Okay.
Um, okay, in bigger organizations, and for example, let me use your company. You said central bank, correct?
Hmm.
Okay. Is there a exclusive records department?
We just formed before, and that's where it comes in. When I joined, everything was
Mhm.
decentralized. So,
Okay.
and I also worked in government for like 12 years before I went there.
Okay.
I've been there now going on 29 years.
Mhm.
And what happened is I was able to compare.
Okay.
So experience when I worked with like Ministry of Labor and Home Affairs and those other places, the British left a structure in place. So in the government agencies, they call them registries.
Right.
All
Mhm.
right. So you had a registry supervisor, you had clerks and stuff who
Mhm.
work in there. Okay,
Mhm.
so they were responsible work that went through, and because it was paper based back then,
Yes.
everything, every letter that was going out, they had to make their way to the registry so that they could be properly filed.
Right.
Okay, there was a handbook, so you knew um what general procedures were, what type they had, samples of the different documents, etc. That was information that was dispersed. Now the problem I have with that is from the British left.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, up to the time I left, when I left in the 90s,
Uh-huh.
and they were working in terms of trying to update that document,
Okay.
but that was the thing. They left in place procedures that persons could follow. So you knew,
Right.
there were client files if they dealt with citizenship. Every application coming in, once that person came to that ministry, those documents were stamped, registered and so they had like registers for documentation. But I think
Mhm.
the problem now, and with a lot of persons complaining about services with regard to getting records from government agencies, etc., is
Mhm. Mhm.
because that disciplined approach kind of somewhat disappeared, because it was only
Right.
that the things needed to be updated, to reflect current changes. And
Right.
that's something with when you go through all that work of developing a program, something needs to be in there for a regular review, even if it's
Right.
only
Okay.
once every year or every 2 years or something, because seeing things, as they say, the only constant is change, you know?
Right. Right. Because
Yeah.
I asked because for a bigger organization, I
Hmm.
would think you should have
Right.
something, a general records department. But for a smaller organization, what I mean, at least I believe, I'm not sure
Mm,
I am speaking for everybody.
mm.
Sometimes the organizations is so small or middle in size, they don't have an
Right.
individual they can dedicate to do that task. So they will have somebody doing numerous tasks take on this records management
Responsibility.
responsibility. And then, like I say, it's a lot of work. You
Mm,
understand what I'm saying? So
yeah.
they're not focused on that on a daily basis. Only when
Hmm.
things come up, like the audit. When audit is coming, everybody's scrambling. They need records. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Then
And
when
that
audit is
that's not
done,
a good
that's
that's not a good
forgotten.
practice. That's not a good
Exactly.
practice.
But that happens because it's not front records management isn't front and center and or focused on unless
Hmm.
something comes up, like you say, like an audit or something is coming up where you have to find information.
Mm-mm.
So bigger companies, because of the volume they generate, they could probably have a, like you say, like government a registry or records department. But a
Hmm.
smaller company, I don't see how that couldn't work, if you understand what
But
I'm
you
saying.
know what? It transitioned, back in the day, the gatekeeper was the secretaries. But nowadays with all the development in technology, what has happened pretty much persons type in their own letters. So
Yes.
that control isn't there anymore because the secretary basically, although that wasn't the only function, if she had a team of clerks coming in or whatever, she had somebody that they know the flow. Once they completed those things, went to the secretary who would do her initial coding and marking what has to go to the files, and she would have somebody file those away. Or sometimes that burden fell on the secretary. But with all the changes, that secretarial role evolved into something else. So
Mm-hmm.
now
Mm-hmm.
that it's even more the onus of each person that's creating information within the organization to understand that it's a corporate asset, it's not your record.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not sure, you should make contact or find out how to manage it. And so when you look at a whole program, that means that from HR, they know that when a new employee comes in, that employee should be given, you give them orientation. That orientation shouldn't only be about the benefits. That orientation shouldn't only be about discipline. That orientation should also entail information about how the company manages records, how it manages its information,
Yes.
so that that person know where they when they create, because we're in a different realm now. Ain't no place you going in, they telling you on paper and putting no file. You creating from Jump Street on your PC.
Uh-huh.
So they need to know where they're gonna store this, where they're gonna put this, how to create, once you're done with the document, where does it go?
Correct.
And
Yes.
it, like I started to explain, we basically had a decentralized system because you have all these departments with specialized functions. So
Mm-hmm.
eventually, I basically came on board once they started to look to say, do enterprise-wide imaging.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, so basically we started with one department. They basically they found a solution that they wanted to use, engaged with the vendor, and what they did was, the vendor trained persons identified to be trainers to
Uh-huh.
which area they were in.
Okay.
And so it's been evolving for us because they moved from all these what I call decentralized areas, because this particular department had somebody to deal with their filing issues, their filing needs, their records that were generated, or to retrieve information and so forth. And then once they started to embrace more of the records management um, scenario, we were involved in what we're talking about right now. Um, that they engaged through a consultant because it had been so many years that the institution had been established, and working with the decentralized mode, and they wanted a more holistic enterprise-wide approach. So based on the recommendations to do the imaging, they started to look more at ways to bring everything together. So out of that consultation came this whole inventory, which identified what every department had, what types of records, the volume. Okay, what was this used for? Who were viewed as the ultimate owners? Because with information, if you're in a particular organization, you're in finance, but then HR has to collaborate with you because they have to send you information on what salary scale the person gonna be on in order for them to pay them the right thing. So it's that collaboration, but ultimately that personnel information is owned by HR. So finance only need that information to process the payments. They don't need to be keeping no files on no individuals. That's not their function. Yeah. So the inventory, it is that's like the core document to get you up to speed. So, is anyone gonna read through this part about the inventory plan? Any volunteers, or everyone tired, ready to go to bed?
I can continue to read if you don't mind.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
Such a gentleman. Our one and only gentleman. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Inventory plan. The purpose of an inventory is to identify and describe records maintained by all or part of an organization. At a minimum, an inventory plan must address the scope of the inventory, the organizational units and types of electronic records to be covered, and the procedures to be used to identify records. To accomplish its intended purpose in a reasonable amount of time with usable results, an inventory must have a manageable scope. Records are inventory at the series level in the program units where they are maintained. The records management function works with departmental coordinators to identify records and collect information about their principal characteristics. The inventory process can be time consuming. A reasonable amount of time must be allowed to complete the work.
Yeah, and that's very important. You see where they say the coordinators. Some people call them liaisons. Some may have additional term linked to records for them. Records clerk or records assistant, stuff like that. But to do this, definitely, like I said, you need to have somebody in that department working with you, okay? Because they see on a daily basis what's happening and how the information flows in and out. And so you want somebody with that strong knowledge about the department and its processes to help you to actually get good metadata about the records. So you can go ahead.
Okay. Defining the inventory scope. To be considered comprehensive, an inventory must encompass recorded information in all formats, paper, photographic, and electronic in every division, department, or all other unit of an organization where records are kept. But enterprise-wide inventories involving all types of records in a single initiative may not be advisable or practical. Enterprise-wide inventories may be workable for small to medium-sized organizations. A company or government agency with fewer than 50 departments, for example, but ambitious inventory strategies pose significant logistic and analytical complications in large organizations with many business units and complex administrative structures. Identifying records is a labor intensive activity that requires painstaking attention to detail. In large organizations, enterprise wide inventories conducted in an attempt to cover all records and business units in a single initiative can take a long time to complete. Multi year inventorying projects are not unheard of. The principal problem with such lengthy inventories is that preparation of retention schedules and other tasks that depend on inventory data are the rationale for conducting an inventory will be correspondingly delayed. Further, some information collected during early stages of a lengthy enterprise-wide inventory may become obsolete before the inventory is completed and the findings analyzed.
Right, and that goes back to, like you say, Moss, in terms of the resources that you have too, would impact, what you're able to do at this phase, you know.
Most
So
definitely. Okay.
right. So you want to go into the inventory very mindful of the scope, very
Right.
mindful, because you don't want it to drag on so long. Like it's pointing out at the end of the day, some of the records don't even exist anymore, you
Right.
know. Yeah, that's important to consider. So sometimes you just have to be creative too If you may need to do maybe in a core area that's not as big, you may need to do surveys, and with targeted questions. So that could help you.
Okay.
And especially if you're a multinational organization, you know, there are a lot of different, because there's so many things that can impact it. If you have different business units that may refer to a document by a what I call a pet name, you know. Certain departments they develop their little acronyms for certain documents. So sometimes you get into a little confusion or a little twist on is what record are they trying to describe. So you want to go into there at the end of the day with a really narrowed scope, and you want to target it so that you don't be lingering, and you want to really plan it beforehand to really minimize hiccups and delays, because you're dealing with persons who are going to be in and out of office, and all of that, especially if they don't care to really talk to you. you know if they don't share that same interest or don't see the significance. It's like pulling teeth, and so that's why you have to have a backup. You have to have someone at senior management who's gonna, once you say, I've made several attempts at this and I'm getting nowhere, who have your back to go and step in and say something to that department's manager that ensures the work gets done. Someone's identified to help you with it.
Okay.
Ready? Business operations may be added or discontinued. Business processes may change, or departments or other organizational units may merge, expand, or be dissolved. In such cases, record keeping practices will be affected and inventory work must be redone. For best results, the records of large organizations should be inventoried in stages, beginning with a single division or business function, then adding others as the work progresses and specific inventory tasks are completed. In a pharmaceutical company, for example, a records inventory might begin in corporate offices. When that work is completed, the inventory initiative can proceed to research and development, marketing, manufacturing, and other organizational units in succession. In a medical center, a records inventory might be initially limited to accounting, human resources, and other administrative departments, with patient records held centrally or in clinical departments to follow in a second stage. In a multinational company, an inventory project might begin with the records maintained in the headquarters country. Alternatively, an inventory must be limited to a specific type of record information, such as financial records in a corporation or government agency. Case files in a law firm, engineering project records in a manufacturing company, property related records in local government, or student records in an academic institution. Such records might be maintained by multiple departments. Limitations on record type can be combined with organizational limitations. As an example, an inventory might be limited to the domestic research and development division of a pharmaceutical company, and initially to regulatory records within that division. An inventory scope can be limited by record format, but it is often advisable to inventory paper, photographic, and electronic records simultaneously, particularly in organizations where systematic records management is a new activity and formal record retention schedules are incomplete or non-existent. Multi-format inventories are also recommended for organizations that need to update retention schedules prepared in the past. Among its advantages, the multi-format approach can simplify the logistics of inventorying by reducing the number of required site visits and meetings when compared to separate inventories of paper, photographic, and electronic records. Multi-format inventories can also provide useful insights into the interrelationship and redundancy of information in various formats. As an example, word processing software produces digital documents that are printed for filing or distribution and saved as computer files on hard drives with backup copies on magnetic tapes or other media. The printed versions may be photocopied multiple times, and the originals of any of the copies may subsequently be microfilmed or even digitized for storage and retrieval. Under the best circumstances, inventorying records is a difficult and time-consuming task. Meetings must be scheduled, information must be collected and analyzed for completeness and usability. Follow-up discussions may be necessary to verify information or clarify specific points. Limiting an inventory scope will make it more manageable and permit faster completion. Results and benefits will be obtained more quickly, although they will admittedly impact only a segment of the organization.
So thank you. Any questions with regard to making sure you define your scope properly in terms of the inventory plan? Okay, so we know that when we're doing this plan, okay, we have to make sure we get our scope right. This gave good information on how to approach it, depending on if you're a large or a small organization, and also um, some of the types of things that you can encounter with the inventory in terms of your duplications, printed photocopies, etc. How are you gonna account for those in that plan? Okay, so in terms of the program units, identifying program units, regardless of scope, record inventories are typically conducted on a program unit basis. For the purposes of this discussion, a program unit, perhaps better described as a record keeping unit, is broadly defined as a division, a department, section, branch, or other administrative unit of a company, government agency, educational institution, or other organization. As a generic designation, program unit avoids confusion associated with the varying names that identify organizational units and their differing hierarchical relationships. Okay, so there's no standard definitions for departments, divisions, or other administrative units. In some organizations, departments are subordinate to divisions. In other cases, the reverse is true. As an added complication, a department or division may divide it into offices, branches, or sections. Alternatively, a section, branch, or office may be the highest level in an organization's administrative hierarchy, and departments and divisions may be somewhat subordinate to them. Okay, so basically it gets back to your inventorying, and then you want to be clear in terms of where this unit fits within your structure, your organizational structure. Okay, because that helps determine, like I said, who owns the record ultimately. Within a corporation, government agency, educational unit, or other organization, program units vary in size, complexity, and hierarchical interrelationships, as well as in the number and types of records they create, maintain, and use. Program units are typically distinguished by their specific missions and responsibilities, which are presumably related to and supported by the records they create or maintain. Some program units may be a large department with hundreds of employees and huge quantities of records in multiple formats. Others may be small offices staffed by one or two persons. Remember, Moss, you was talking about this, who maintain a few paper files or electronic records. When
Right,
planned,
that's what I was mentioning.
right,
Like, does it have to be a like a physical area where you have to, I know we have an area where we keep records,
Mhm.
but is there a physical area where like somebody will be there to maintain those
and
records?
and and that, and this is getting into size right now,
Okay,
so
okay.
although the function, you may have to have like a one-man band shop, and like you say,
Mhm.
that can be a lot of work.
Correct.
Yeah, but so this determination is typically done by looking at, like I said, the org charts, your directories, administrative handbooks. In many cases, such documents may be out of date, and additional program units may be discovered while the inventory is in progress or after it has been completed. So, it isn't like you just, kudos to those who their organization is really well structured and they routinely keep up to date with these things because, like I say, a lot of times in organization, this is only triggered because they have been bitten by um, probably somebody doing something that impacts the organization negatively, and it involves like I say, there are legal consequences, or not only that, you can also have consequences whereby the actual institution itself, when you have the reputation is damaged, and that can be just as bad as somebody stealing from you, you know so at this time, management support, would you like to read that for us more? This It's critical to developing the program.
Management support and inventory initiative cannot succeed without top management support and the cooperation of knowledgeable persons in individual program units. To obtain the required support, the objectives of the inventory and its relationship to the systematic control of recorded information must be explained to and appreciated by appropriate levels of management. To demonstrate its support, an organization's top management should send a directive to all program units that will be affected by an inventory initiative. The directive should announce that an inventory of the organization business records has been authorized, and it should solicit the cooperation of program units. Presented as a management memorandum, the directive is typically by the records management function function for top management's review and approval. At a minimum, the memorandum should acknowledge the value of the organization's business records as information assets, emphasize the importance of managing such records in a systematic manner, briefly explain the role of the records inventory as an essential data gathering activity and the critical first step in the systematic control of the organization's recorded information, indicate when the inventory will begin, who will conduct it, and approximately how long it will take. Instruct each program unit to designate a departmental organ coordinator, who will assist the records manager in identifying and understanding records that support the program unit's business operations. Hold on. Okay. Departmental coordinators are critical to the success of records inventories and other records management initiatives. As discussed in Chapter 1, they are knowledgeable in the records maintained by their program units. Departmental coordinators are the principal contact persons for all records management activities within their program units. They will assist the records manager in conducting inventories and in formulating re- retention and disposition recommendations for their program units. Once retention schedules are finalized, departmental coordinators will be responsible for implementing them in their program units.
Okay, and this is very important if you're just trying to formulate a program in your institution. Like I said at the start, it's very, very, very difficult if you don't have that management support at the top. you know. And so this is good knowledge because this gives you an idea of how to get started. Once you've done all your groundwork, etc., you were getting ready to really go through. It could involve you could have steering committees involved as well, that to help you. And like I say, Moss, that depends on the size of the organization.
Correct.
Sometimes if it's a one-man band, you just have to take it one bite at a time. Once you
Mm.
get a manager that's backing you, then you move towards getting this inventory conducted. Okay, so this is you have to have that little memo or briefing note or whatever your terminology is in your organization, something, okay, that goes out to let everyone know you have authority to now conduct an inventory.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And so we heard this term fleshed out in the beginning, when Roll was reading, in terms of a series. And so series relate, they're like they're groupings of records that are similar and fit together. And the series itself would have the same retention time. So this is the next this is an important component that you would have in your inventory. So it's explaining that concept about the record series. Okay. So with the record series, and everybody understands what we're talking about when we say program unit, right? Program unit in terms of the various departments, etc., and their functions. So earlier it mentioned about accounts and HR, etc., and the fact that now that you have these different units with these differing records and you're going to conduct this inventory, um, that's where you now get into applying the series concept. Okay. For each program unit, inventorying, retention, scheduling, and related operations are applied to records at the series level as opposed to the document, folder, or item level. Okay, and we're talking about um, document as it relates to having a paper-based system. Okay, and you could also have folders in a paper-based system. And then when you transition to electronic, you still end up with document and folders. So that's why it's critical to understand that although you're transitioning, you're not dropping your core principles and your core processes. Okay, they have to now transition as well into the electronic form if that's what you're now embracing. Okay, so broadly defined, a record series, and this is a definition that you definitely need to know, so I would highlight that. Broadly defined, a record series is a group of logically related records that support a specific business or administrative operation performed by a given program unit. Okay, so we did allude to some of that when we were talking about accounts with invoices, ledgers, etc. A record series typically consists of multiple documents, folders, or items that are filed, indexed, and or used together. In some cases, a record series may exist in several different media. Active records from a given series may be kept in paper form, for example, and inactive active records stored on microfilm. Now, microfilm is pretty archival. Anybody here have or still interact with microfilm? I love it because whereas with an electronic media, okay, if something happens and that system shuts down on you, um, it's nothing. You can't read it. You can't. It's in bits and bytes. Okay, but if you have a system where for archival purposes you're using microfilm, push come to shove at the end of the day, you could still get that fiche or film or whatever up into the light. You could use a magnifier and you could still access the content. So for me, microfilm is a plus, but it's been pretty much pushed to the side because of the I guess the rush and the love for the convenience of working in the electronic realm. That instantaneous, once everything is in order and lined up, the information doesn't take long to get up. You don't have to go load a tape and then find the location on the tape and all that. You can just do your search. You can just Google it or whatever. So microfilm is still used by some places. It can be an expensive venture as well because you have to have there's certain protocols around your tapes and storing them so that they don't deteriorate. So properly conducted, a records inventory identifies and describes each record series maintained by a given program unit. Examples of record series include open purchase orders in a purchasing department, construction contracts in an engineering project management office, employee benefits record in a human resources department, closed claims in an insurance company, invoices in an accounts payable department, property files in a municipal building department, patient records in a hospital or physician's office, patent files in an intellectual property office, laboratory notebooks in a research organization, applications pending in a college admissions department, incident reports in a police department, litigation files in a legal department, work orders in a maintenance department. Okay, so now that's the whole concept in understanding when you're putting together this inventory. You're looking at it in the various series because further down the road you want to be able to apply retention, meaning how long to keep this particular series. So the purchase orders, in my example earlier, I was saying maybe you may only keep them for a year or two at the most. Okay, but this whole concept of applying the retention time frame, that's a consultative decision involving legal, IT, audit, other areas that may need to use that information as well. So your series is basically that specific group of records that belong together, logically related together. So if you're a new applicant to college, all those new applicants, those applications, that's a series, that's a record series for the college department. This is two ways that you may use to conduct the inventory: consultation versus questionnaires. And I mentioned this earlier as well. So information collected during a records inventory will be used to prepare retention schedules, as explained when we go on to the next chapter. An inventory success is determined by its suitability for that purpose. Inventories must be conducted systematically and efficiently. Inventory procedures must be well planned. A formalized survey instrument will ensure the usefulness, uniformity, and completeness of information collected during the inventory process. The survey instrument delineates the descriptive information and other data that must be collected for each record series. Okay? The survey instrument may be distributed as a questionnaire to departmental coordinators with completed questionnaires to be returned to the records unit by a specified date. Alternatively, records management staff can consult with individual program units to conduct physical inventory of record series. Assisted by departmental coordinators, records managers will personally collect the information required by the survey instrument. The questionnaire and consultation methods are applicable to all formats of records, not just one type. 5 decades of records management theory and practice have identified the advantages and limitations of the various approaches. The obvious attraction of the questionnaire method is it's a shorter elapsed time for the information gathering phase of a records inventory. The time saving is achieved by distributing the inventory workload among departmental coordinators, allowing multiple program units to be inventoried simultaneously. The consultative method, by contrast, relies on the records management staff, or in many cases, a records analyst, as a solo practitioner who must inventory program units sequentially. As its principal shortcoming, the questionnaire method provides limited opportunities for direct interaction between the program unit personnel who conduct the inventory and the records management staff who must prepare retention recommendations based on the data. Even under the best circumstances, obtaining information that is sufficiently clear and detailed to be analyzed by others is difficult. Misinterpretations, discrepancies in calculation, and some marginally useful responses are to be expected. If the questionnaire method is selected, a records management staff must provide orientation sessions for departmental coordinators, supplemented by detailed written instructions. So you can see you're not just going in there willy-nilly and picking things off your head to say, well, maybe this information might matter. The whole structure, the whole format in terms of dealing with planning and inventory is very detailed, and its aim is, like I said before, to get valid and good data about the data. Okay, so it in this session pretty much does the compare and contrast the advantages and disadvantages with the
Ms.
go
Tucker, I was just thinking while you were reading, I am thinking, I'm still mulling over, but I'm thinking we're small enough where I can probably work with both methods.
hmm
First, I can do consultation one-on-one with the
hmm
different individuals in the different areas,
so
and
so
based on
what's
the
your
feedback,
staff come how many staff
no, under 10.
oh oh
So,
okay
so I'm telling you, we're really small. So I can sit one-on-one with them to give them get some feedback, give them an idea what I need, what I want, and
hmm
then based on feedback, I can put together a questionnaire
hmm
to
and
so
so
they can do the work.
right
So they will do the work, but at least with that first consultation where we have that dialogue, they'll have an idea of what I'm looking for, and then I can get feedback from them, and from that feedback, I can build my questionnaire.
right you see this is the like they say this the these are the building blocks you
Right,
see
right.
right and so if the thing is once you start you don't let the information get stale dated. That's why I say you review it. If it's
Mm-hmm.
best to review it annually, then do something, but don't let it sit for years because you'd find you have to go back, you have to start from scratch again because so much has changed. So it's good to get started, and it's not going to be perfect, but because you have started, you're now cued in and linked in to know, oh, well, it this piece of information here would be good to have to add some more some more teeth or some more guidance or even some more clarity around the particular series of records or who should create them, who should be the owners of these.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So on the next page, it basically gives some samples. Okay, so there's a worksheet here, and I like to Google it too, and then you get to see. You can Google something that you're in with the credit union type organizations, right, Moss? So you can
Somewhat, yeah. Uh-huh.
okay, but you can Google if you say this is too generic and you'd want to see like someone like a Blair who's in the
Mhm.
financial services sector. She may want to look at an inventory that was done for a financial institution, so you can do a Google search of that and click on the images and then look and drill down further, and that's where you get good ideas from. you know you get good ideas, and even with the standards, sometimes they provide you with a generic type um, framework that you can use. So so what I'm trying to say is now you see when I talk about the heavy lifting, that's what you're doing right here. Because you ain't get to telling people how to do nothing yet. You ain't get to
Mhm.
writing no policy to say the organization's records are just that. The organization's records are not an individual. So when you work on something, then that should go to the designated place of storage. Okay, and then who has to access it should be the only people that are provided with the access. So the information you find here uh, describes the record, and then the additional components needed to make sure that record is secure and only gets in the hands of people who need it. That additional will come from your collaboration. Okay, so with your committees, etc., when you do all this work about identifying what's there, and through the discussions with somebody in the IT, with someone in security, with someone in audit, you get to add your additional metadata that helps to make the record secure and usable to only those who need to have access to it. So the inventory provides the information that you can then attach the relevant, I like to call them hooks. So when you're doing like an HR, right away that's personal information. So you know that has to be, if you're classifying your sensitivity and stuff like that, you have your private, confidential, and non-confidential, which means generally it's open to the staff, and in instances which will happen once we see freedom of information fully fleshed out. Okay, it would not only be just for the internal staff eyes only. You're now then gonna have to, when the public demands information on relevant subjects that it's in the act that they have access to, you basically have a certain amount of time to provide it. So that's why at this time, all the more to get organized so that when that legislation is deployed, and especially if you're in an institution or an agency that has to provide that accountability to the public, you need to be able to make sure you can do that, because the law comes with stipulations. If a request is made for certain information, when that law comes into effect, you have to provide that within a certain period of time. You have to provide something. If you don't find it, you have to at least have responded to the person and said something to indicate what your plan is now. you know so I think all this buy-in time in terms of it not being fully launched yet should be that leading factor to tell organizations, and even with the COVID, clean up your act, get organized, especially when it relates to your corporate information assets. Okay, so on the form itself, if you're looking at it, you see that you have to say which record series or title it belongs to. So if it's invoices, then you have to that title, you need to put it there. Okay, some persons go beyond, and for every series they have a code, because they're putting it in electronically, and they want to be able to, at the time of disposition, quickly run the relevant reports for certain series of records that now may need to transition, either for preservation or, like we say, for destruction. Okay, your company, department, and even though it's just a worksheet, you ideally you want to have some type of a logo or something there that indicate, some type of official stamp. Okay, so you have, whether it's a copy, all of that is important. A record copy, yes or no. If it's not a record copy, where's the record? If it is a record copy, where's the record? Any descriptions about it? Okay, and I think this one is a very detailed one. It looks like this would have been something from the Records Association. Yeah, I think to the bottom they're saying it. Yeah. So they take in, and so you see why this can take you some time, right? Okay. Format size. So your strategy may be where you send out something ahead of time and you schedule an appointment to go over it with them so that you make sure you get the correct information, but you let the persons who are directly related or close to the information, you let them do this part of the work. So you could send out the inventory form and schedule it. That's another way to handle it and make sure, there's that degree of accuracy in terms coming from, as they would say, the horse's mouth, somebody who's directly affiliated with and working with those records. So even the stuff about the format and size, the information on that. If there's a known retention time frame, it's there. If not, then this fleshes up to the level where your committees and whoever would then make a determination based on the information presented, how long the record needs to be retained. Okay, you have to still know who's doing the inventory. You have to be able to contact them. Okay, and any particular remarks, any significant things that was pointed out with regard to that. Okay, location, type of record, the format, again, how is the information filed? Okay, how do you want the information retrieved? Okay, and then there's even calculation on how much records you have at the time, and there's special calculations for that, cubic inches, cubic feet, okay? And so some measurements you use depending on if the record is active or inactive. So if it's record in storage boxes in a record center, the cubic inches, the cubic measurement would be applicable, okay? And basically, if you look on the form to the bottom, it gives you the equivalent of what they're talking about when they talk about cubic foot measurement. Okay, your drawers, your letter size or legal size drawers, whether they're lateral or vertical, it tells you the estimated cubic feet to the bottom there. Okay, if it's on shelving, if it's card, drawer, If you have microfilm, if you have 4 by 6, 5 by 8 cards, it tells you an estimate of the measurements. Okay, so pretty much the timetable relates to being able to schedule it out and follow up. See, you don't want to start and get frustrated and stop, because then that's another negative in terms of getting the program up and running in a timely way, so that your information collected doesn't grow old on you. You know, you don't want to. This is a process you're investing a lot of time in, so you want to make sure that it counts. Okay, and so pretty much with the inventory, we're talking about paper and electronic. Okay, some of the things may vary because in electronic you're looking at volume another way, not cubic feet. Okay, and there are challenges with the electronic issues. Miss Brooke, do you want to read some of the special issues when we deal with electronic records?
That's
It's
from
bottom of the page.
pardon me?
Special issues for electronic records.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're all moving in that direction, you know. So it's like now you're trying to wrap up your paper by scanning it in electronically. Okay, but that isn't the end all be all solution. Okay, because moving it from paper and not focusing on those core elements, you end up with a electronic mess. Okay, that's even more difficult. When you could actually, if you get in a jam with paper, you could find a spot, you could spread it out, you could try and pick and organize. How are you going to do that in the electronic realm?
Mhm.
So with the electronic realm, it's even more important that you get those ducks lined up properly. It's more difficult. Granted, once it's organized, it's awesome. You can get things done quicker. You can find through, you can do your searches, but to get there, that little time to organize is key. So Brooke, you can go ahead.
Okay. Special issues for electronic records. Inventories of electronic records are complicated by the fact that such records are invisible and consequently difficult to identify. Record characteristics cannot be easily determined by observation as they can with paper files. Empirical methods may be useful for magnetic tapes, optical discs, and other removable media, but many electronic records are stored out of view on non-removable hard drives. When inventorying records in individual program units, the existence of electronic records can often be determined by inquiring about electronic counterparts when paper or photographic records are identified. That approach, however, will not identify electronic records that have no paper or photographic counterparts.
And you're speaking to your digitally born records. Okay, that's you have I don't know if I mentioned it before, but in terms of the unstructured content, you got Word, you got PowerPoint, you got Excel, and whatever other things. And so we're going at it, getting our tasks done using these means and creating corporate records. But how are we making sure they filter or they factor in to the repository that keeps the corporate information?
Okay. Some records managers consequently recommend that electronic records be inventoried by identifying and analyzing the specific information systems with which they are associated. Broadly defined, an information system consists of hardware and/or software components that are designed to perform one or more information processing operations. To identify electronic records associated with computer-based information systems, a records manager must first identify the application software utilized by a given program unit. Both custom-developed computer programs and pre-written software packages must be considered. Data files, text files, digital images, or other electronic record series associated with such software can then be identified. This method is easiest to implement for electronic records created and maintained by computers installed in and operated by a given program unit. It can also be used for electronic records associated with information processing applications that run on mainframes, mid-range computers, and network servers installed outside of the program unit. Such computers, which create and maintain electronic records on a program unit's behalf, may be operated by a centralized information technology department, or in case of so-called hosted applications, by an external organization such as a commercial computer service provider.
Okay, so in that case, that's like we do an imaging. So we decide, oh, we're gonna use a IBM product. Okay, so that IBM product then causes us to have to engage with a vendor. Okay, and so that vendor is now providing you with the service that's needed to keep that program going, you know. But a lot of detail is needed at the time when it comes to knowing that in a crisis situation, business continuity, you identify what files in that system or what you need from that system in order to operate in unusual circumstances, you know. So that is also critical in terms of when we look at the special issues that impact us with our electronic information.
Okay. Uh, the same method can be used to inventory electronic records created and or used by audio and video recording and playback equipment, as well as by data recorders and other specialized instrumentation encountered in certain scientific, engineering, and medical applications. As with computer-based information systems, the records manager must first determine the type of devices employed by a given program unit, then identify the electronic records associated with such devices. If a program unit has camcorders or other video recording equipment, for example, the records manager should inquire about videotapes, DVDs, or other media produced by such equipment. Similarly, records managers should inquire about video recordings produced for the program unit by centralized video departments or video service companies. As a potentially significant limitation, inventories conducted on a program unit basis may fail to identify electronic records associated with enterprise-wide information systems that serve multiple departments. Such records may support interdepartmental communications, budget preparation, multi-departmental transaction processing, and such analytical activities as knowledge management, data mining, and decision support. Examples include electronic mail, web pages posted on the public internet or organizational intranets, computerized document repositories created by content management software, and centralized databases and data warehouses of financial, personnel, customer, product, and other information. Although these centralized information resources serve multiple program units, they are not the property of any single program unit. The records they create and maintain usually reside on computers operated and administered by centralized information technology departments. Individual program units access these enterprise-wide electronic records, but they are not responsible for storing, protecting, or otherwise managing them. The records are not stored locally. Consequently, they may not be mentioned when inventorying a program's unit's records. Departmental coordinators are presumably knowledgeable about the purpose and value of electronic records from a business perspective, but they may not be able to answer questions about media file formats, archiving practices, data backup procedures, and other technical matters relating to creation, storage, retention, and protection of a specific electronic records. Interviews with knowledgeable technical specialists will often be required to obtain this information. For applications that operate on computers managed by an organization's information technology unit, the technical specialist should be the employee who is principally responsible for a given application. For applications that run on departmental servers, the technical specialist should be the departmental employee who manages the application. For hosted applications, commercial computer service providers have technical support personnel assigned to specific accounts.
Okay, thank you so much. And that is so important because, that's the direction we're all headed. We're all headed into the electronic realm. And so in order, because like they say here, it's not that your department is using a system that's managed and it's maintained by the IT department. So hence that whole talk initially about the importance of being able to collaborate, because you're gonna, when you talk about the inventory of your electronic information, that conversation has to be had so you can understand this whole thing about the backup practices, about archiving, because like I said, if information is housed in a system that is marked for retention indefinitely, and when I say indefinitely, that means forever and ever and ever, that responsibility now is for your technology personnel to have what is called a data preservation strategy. Okay? Because they have to make sure that record survives. And that means they have to constantly be migrating and updating to ensure it's accessible for however indefinite is, until the company kind of shuts down or what have you. And then if it's, like I say, something of cultural or historical significance, you still want to have access to it so that it can be transferred to a national archives. Okay, so the other section primarily talks about instruments. Okay, the survey instrument. Okay, so it talks about the series titles, the description, what dates to cover, your format. Okay, and then you even have a section in here where it goes into when you're dealing with the paper sizes that you would have, how the understanding the dimensions, and also when you look at ISO designations, they're in the A4, B4, A3, and it still gives you that detail so that if it comes to that, because your documentation, and this is because of paper again, for persons who haven't transitioned, all of this is taken into the account with the inventory, because certain series of records may be a different size paper from another series of records. Okay, and when you're dealing with paper and you're thinking about record series and inactive records, if they have to be boxed and packed, that's another set of details that you would need to know about in terms of what fits in what box and the volume that's there. Okay, and that's where we have arrangement, and they do touch a bit on it in terms of with the computer, with the electronic concept there. Okay, even with the quantity, like I alluded to earlier, certain things are measured in cubic feet. Okay, certain things are measured in linear inches. When you go into electronic, then it's like the gigabytes, the kilobytes. So all of those are some of the things that help you to assess your volume with regard to the records. Okay, we also have to look at location. Okay, and there's reference activity. How often do you have to go to these records? Electronic or paper? Is it frequently accessed? In that case, then that's part of your active phase. So your strategy around your active records is for those that you have to frequently access. Okay, those that pretty much you've completed that transaction, so it's the evidence sitting there. You don't have to go to it. It's a just in case. They are now inactive. So you don't keep your inactive in your active workspace per se, meaning that that's valuable floor space you may need for another desk. You may need to um, set up a whole other unit, you know. So the how you manage the phase of the record is also critical because that determines what you're what you're gonna be documenting in this inventory, because anything inactive should not, you should have a separate setup for that. So that's costing again. Are you going to use a vendor to store your stuff, or are you going to invest in a building that would also need to be up to standard to keep the records, to stop them from becoming a rat's nest, or something with mold. Even though they're inactive, they haven't expired as yet, because on your retention time frame you say audits come up or something else you have to do. So there's a business need at some point in time to go back to them, but not beyond 7 years, not beyond 10 years. So at the right time, then they make their way to the shredder. Okay, you have confidentiality. Okay, meaning that you have what they call PII, personally identifiable information, and then you have PHI, which is protected health information. Okay, so there are stipulations around these varying degrees of confidentiality that's needed in terms of if you have organizational secrets, you don't need them to get out. Any of y'all know how to make Kentucky? Any of y'all know the real recipe for Kentucky or Coca-Cola? Trade secrets, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So that's valuable information, millions of dollars. So it needs that degree of protection. Okay. You also have military intelligence. And a country like the US, highly classified, so depending on that extent of protection and security that's needed, that's where you get into classification. Okay, so you classify it based on access codes as well. Okay, so someone like Blair, she may have access to that part of the company's financial records. Okay, somebody like Brooke may work in HR. She is processing something that involves finance. Okay, so she only needs access to go to do that particular level of transaction. Okay, so the other things that they follow up on relate to your software and hardware requirements, which will determine how frequently you have to migrate, whether you need to change and get off that platform altogether. Okay, and also your vital records, because like I say, those are mission critical records. So they're the records that you would have to look at when we have like a pandemic, or when we have like a hurricane. With the hurricane name would just hit Abaco and Freeport. Um,
Dorian.
Dorian. How could I forget that?
Don't,
Yeah.
don't feel bad. We want to forget that.
Okay. So those things, all of this assessment is a part of doing that inventory so that you can get to that final product, which is in our coverage of chapter 3. That final document that's called your corporate retention schedule. And like I say, you can go online and look for some of these things. That's where you'll get ideas on things that may work for you or things that may not work for you. You know, look at policies from different places, or some similar to the type of organization you currently work in, and then you get a feel for the language and the setup, and so you're able to practice and develop your own. um, like I say, we're small scale companies. We're not like the Fortune 500s, and so they definitely have to invest heavily because of the risk involved in not managing their information properly. In the US they're very litigious, and so you have to face IRS, you have tax. If you're in the financial services area and you're dealing with securities and stuff like that, you have another regulator. Okay, expect the health profession heavily regulated. They have HIPAA, they have HIPAA regulations and laws in terms of people's health information and what you could do and what you could disclose, etc. Here I guess we're kind of lax with it because we don't have all that pressure, but we do in terms of financial regulations, because now there's a big thing about money laundering and terrorist financing, and so those big league countries, they're forming together and they're creating alliances. They don't want tax havens and anything that they think could shield illicit gains. So it puts the pressure on the financial service industry to be transparent, to be able to show accountability and integrity in dealing with their customers, and also to be able to satisfy the regulators. So pretty much for chapter 2, we've looked at what goes into the inventory process. So for reinforcement, like I said, take your time and savor it. And basically, if there's anything that you need further clarity on, further explanation, you can um, you can reach out, and I will try and do my best to make sure you get a response to that. Now, what I want you to do is really in the various chapters, there are some, maybe one or two summary key points. pay attention to those as well, because it really, in a nutshell, goes over what would have been covered in that chapter. Did anyone look at their glossary? Any of the terms we're mentioning so far seem unfamiliar? In terms of understanding what they're talking about with the retention schedules, etc. You have to understand record series, okay, in terms of general terms about the reference activity, okay, in terms of how much or how frequently the record is accessed. You want to know record and non-record. You want to understand what the terminology in terms of if you're talking about a functional retention schedule, what does that entail versus another type of retention schedule? And basically, functional is just talking that you've inventoried your records, and basically based on the function, that's how you have structured your plan, your file plan and retention schedule. Okay, so pretty much we're winding down, and I just thank you for coming out this evening. Trust um, this real dry reading hasn't taken a toll on you guys.
Ms.
But
Tucker,
okay,
what will we be covering next week?
next
Chapter
week, that's the one where
three?
you actually go, yeah, chapter
So
3.
can we get the paper or the chapter sent before, so you can read it in advance, and then I come with questions, because well, at least I just got this like this afternoon.
Because
So
the
while we
file
were
was too
reading,
big. Yes,
okay,
it was
yeah.
too
So if
big.
we
So I
can
had
get it in
sent it.
advance,
It just at the last minute. I asked him if he had gotten the files, and he was like no. So when I looked at them, they because of the size.
it
So
didn't come through.
okay,
Okay.
what I'll
So if
do then, because it's
uh-huh.
actually a couple chapters I have to send out. So
Okay.
what I'll do is I'll try and see if Miguel can send them tomorrow. But based on the fact that he said it was too big, I'll have to zip it and send it.
Right. Okay, so I can, if we get it in advance, we can go through it and
And
see
then
if there's
have the
anything,
questions.
right,
Right.
if anything, because like
Okay.
tonight, it's no problem reading through, but
Hmm.
then I
For it to
can't really
stick,
take
yeah.
it in as I read it.
Yeah.
If I
Yeah, you
read it
have
in
to do that
advance,
second. Okay.
right, right.
That's no problem.
Thank you.
I just so happens I said, let me see if he got, yeah, it was a good thing I did ask, because um like I said, he said no, he hadn't gotten them.
Okay, okay. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you too. So like I say, to make it more relevant, just Google some of the things that we've basically identified as important components of this. So there's and what I would suggest, Google Records Management Lifecycle, and they have lots of the image, click select image, so that's all you get, and you can see you have, well, there's lots of life cycle. You have systems life cycle, you have information life cycle, but the records management life cycle, like I say, records management is really at the crux of managing um, non-published information related to that corporate entity's business. So it's like it's created, and it could be created internally and externally, because if you have a specific mandate, people will be sending in applications, etc., to you. You may be drafting documents, etc. So you're working, creating internally as well. So it's good to look at those graphics in relation to what we've covered right now. So you can probably you could look at we in inventory. This was a lot. This is in depth. You can actually Google a a schedule. Okay, and if you want to be more applicable, Google something that's more relevant to the area that you're in. Okay, so basically, you will see when you make up the schedule, you would have to have some type of a legend or guidance. Okay, some people may use acronyms and initials and stuff, um, which give you ideas on why or why how come you're disposing of it. Is it because of a particular legislation? Is it because of administrative decisions? That type of thing. And I have a few I have a few documents that I'd add to that with the readings. So that like you say, you'd be able to look at it and see how it ties in with your progress within your institution. So I'll probably send a sample policy, a sample retention schedule. Probably see if there's some more stuff with a file plan as well. And I think there's some tidbits I had because basically it gets a bit technical with the inventory in terms of you having to assess. And so to assess record volumes, when you look at standard file cabinet size dealing with paper, you'd be able to kind of eye it and know that um, that's a good estimation, like a full drawer, a if it stores all the files are either legal size or the 8.5 by 11. So there's a general sheet. Sometimes even if you're dealing with a storage company, they usually have handouts. They have handouts to tell you how they're going to bill you based on your volume. So if there's nothing else or any other points or informational queries, we'll call it a night. So thank you guys for coming out again. And
Okay.
okay, yes. So since I'm gonna try and make sure those other scan chapters get to you, there's gonna be a little assignment, basically, in terms of the life cycle, just to make sure we're on one accord with understanding how the um, records move through that process and what's attached to each phase, types of records that we'd normally find at that particular point. Active record, if it's inactive, and volume, how we assess volume of those. But I bid you all good night. Everyone's home, right? Nobody has to go to leave from somewhere to go home.
No, I'm home.
Okay. Oh, that's good.
I think we are, I own.
All right then. So everybody snuggle in. So restful evening, restful evening. Take care.
Have a good night. Thank you.
All right.
Good
Bye.
evening.
Yeah.
Good evening, all.
All
Okay,
right.
good night.